Dane Kyrell was quiet, obsessive, and invisible to most. Until the night he stabbed Mira Talcott in the face 10 times, then calmly stayed in her apartment for 2 days, eating pizza beside her lifeless body. What led this reserved mechanic to such a monstrous act, and how did no one see it coming until it was far too late? Cresswell Lane was a quiet street lined with modest brick apartments and flower boxes that overflowed with color in the summer. The kind of neighborhood where people knew each other's routines but rarely got involved. On the corner in apartment 2B, Mira Talcott lived alone until recently. Dane Kyrell, her boyfriend of nearly a year, had been staying over more frequently, and neighbors had grown used to seeing him come and go. But on Thursday evening, things shifted. That night, Mira came home from her weekly trip to the local art shop, walked up the narrow staircase to her unit, and disappeared behind the pale blue door of her apartment. Dane was already inside, waiting. Mira didn't leave her apartment again. For the next 2 days, no one saw her on her balcony watering her plants, and no lights flicked on at her usual late-night hours. Her social media, normally buzzing with posts of her latest digital designs or stories from her freelance work, went completely dark. It wasn't unusual for someone to take a break, but for Mira, it was out of character. By Saturday morning, a few neighbors began to notice odd things. A sour chemical smell drifted from Mira's window, sharp and unpleasant, like bleach and something decaying beneath it. Ellis Dean, who lived directly across the hall, had always admired Mira's cheerful personality and habit of playing soft music while she worked. But now, the apartment was completely silent. No laughter, no music, no signs of life. She brushed off the discomfort until she saw something that stopped her. That afternoon, as Ellis stepped out to take her trash downstairs, she noticed Dane outside, kneeling by the communal bins. He was wearing rubber gloves and tossing something into a black trash bag. The contents weren't clear, but a piece of what looked like red-stained clothing slipped out of the bag's opening. Dane pushed it back in quickly and avoided eye contact as he hurried inside. Ellis froze. Something was wrong. Very wrong. She returned to her apartment and tried to calm herself, wondering if maybe Mira was sick or had gone out of town, but then another thought hit her. She hadn't seen Dane leave that apartment once in the last 2 days. The more Ellis thought about it, the more convinced she became that something was off. She knocked on Mira's door late Saturday evening. No answer. She knocked again, louder. Still silence. It was the silence that finally made her pick up the phone and call the police. When officers arrived late that night for a wellness check, they didn't expect anything unusual. These calls often ended with someone answering the door groggily, embarrassed at the commotion. But this one was different. Officer Brynn Halter. The responding officer knocked several times and called out Mira's name. The door, oddly, was unlocked. When she pushed it open, a wave of something metallic and sickening hit her. Inside, the apartment was dimly lit and cold. The curtains were drawn, and a fan was running in the corner as if trying to push away a lingering stench. The air was heavy, filled with the overwhelming scent of bleach and something rotting beneath it. Halter moved cautiously through the living room, her flashlight slicing through the shadows. Nothing appeared broken or disturbed. A laptop sat on the kitchen table, still open. A cell phone lay on the floor beside a knocked-over chair. When she entered the bedroom, Halter stopped cold. Mira Talcott's body lay on the floor, partially wrapped in a blanket. Her face was barely recognizable, having suffered multiple stab wounds, blood dried and matted across her hair and shoulders. A pillow was stained deep crimson where her head had rested. The floor beneath her was soaked and sticky, but what disturbed the officers most was not the body. It was the rest of the room. A pizza box with fresh slices still inside sat on the dresser. A bottle of soda was half drunk on the nightstand. There were signs someone had been living in the apartment even after the murder. A toothbrush in the bathroom was wet. A pair of men's shoes were neatly placed at the door. Dane Kyrell was nowhere to be found. Dane Kyrell had always been the kind of man who stayed in the background. To most people, he was polite, quiet, and forgettable. He worked part-time at a garage on the outskirts of town, fixed engines without complaint, and kept to himself. Mira Talcott had met him at a community art show nearly a year ago. Their relationship began like most, slow, warm, with just enough charm to seem normal. But those who knew Mira best said she had started pulling away in recent months. Something had shifted in Dane, though no one could quite say what. Behind his calm exterior, Dane's mind was unraveling. In the weeks leading up to Mira's death, he had been acting increasingly erratic. He had missed multiple shifts at the garage, giving vague excuses about not feeling well. His texts to Mira became longer, more obsessive. He demanded to know where she was at all times. He questioned her friends, grew jealous of harmless conversations, and became convinced that she was hiding something from him. Police later uncovered that Dane had begun stalking Mira's digital life. He had guessed the password to her email and monitored her messages. He tracked her social media activity, even noted down the timestamps of her posts. It was clear he was spiraling into a deep paranoia, building a narrative in his mind that Mira was unfaithful or preparing to leave him. But there was no evidence of betrayal, only fear. Mira had been looking up therapist contacts and domestic abuse hotlines in the days before her murder. Detectives found a disturbing detail while combing through Dane's recent activity. He had purchased a hunting knife from a local outdoor store just 5 days before Mira's death. The purchase wasn't illegal, but it raised suspicions. The knife, recovered later from Mira's kitchen sink, matched the wounds on her body exactly. Dane had wiped it clean, but forensic analysis found traces of blood embedded in the handle. Inside Mira's apartment, investigators also discovered that her phone had been tampered with. Dane had deleted a string of recent text conversations, possibly trying to erase signs of their final argument or any desperate messages Mira might have sent. Her phone history was empty, cleared entirely. Her laptop, however, told another story. Files showed repeated access to mental health forums and journals where Mira had written about feeling trapped and frightened in her own home. As police tried to piece together a timeline, one thing became increasingly clear. Dane hadn't snapped in a moment of rage. He had planned something. He had stayed in Mira's apartment for over 2 full days after killing her, not just hiding, living. Investigators discovered food delivery receipts showing orders placed from her phone. One receipt, time-stamped nearly 24 hours after Mira's death, showed he ordered a large pepperoni pizza and a bottle of orange soda. The food had been partially eaten, left next to her body. There was also evidence that Dane had cleaned up. The sink contained bleach, and a set of towels had been used to scrub the floors. Blood smears had been poorly wiped from the hallway wall. But he hadn't done a thorough job. Forensics revealed fingerprints, shoe prints, and even fibers from the clothes Dane had been wearing. It was as if he had tried to erase his presence, but lacked the focus or resolve to finish. Neighbors had noticed strange behavior in those 2 days. Dane had been seen pacing the balcony in the early morning hours, muttering to himself. At one point, he left a note on Mira's door that simply read, "Sleeping, don't disturb." No one thought to question it then. By the time police entered the apartment, Dane was already gone. Surveillance footage showed him leaving the building at 3:11 a.m. on Sunday, carrying a backpack and wearing a hoodie. He left calmly, like someone going on a trip. No panic, no running. Just a man walking away from a crime that he'd spent days pretending hadn't happened. When Officer Brynn Halter stepped into apartment 2B, she knew immediately this was not a simple welfare check gone wrong. It was a full-blown homicide. Mira Talcott's lifeless body on the bedroom floor told a story too violent to ignore. The blood had long dried, creating dark patches on the wooden floor beneath her. The sharp force injuries to her face and neck were brutal, and the absence of defensive wounds suggested she had been taken by surprise. 10 precise stabs, all to the face, signaled more than just murder. It hinted at personal rage, a calculated expression of hatred. The forensic team got to work quickly. They began photographing every inch of the apartment, collecting samples and logging evidence. The crime scene was a contradiction. On one hand, there was blood, disarray, and the smell of death. On the other, the kitchen counter was spotless, the pizza box from the delivery still fresh, and the bathroom sink wiped down. It wasn't just a place where a murder had occurred. It was a place someone had lived in after committing it. Officer. Halter found a used toothbrush still damp. A towel hung neatly on the rack. There were 2 glasses on the kitchen table, one with fingerprints that didn't match Mira's. In the trash bin, they found packaging from disinfectant wipes and gloves. There was no doubt now. Dane Kyrell had stayed with Mira's body after killing her, not for minutes or hours, but for 2 full days. The autopsy later confirmed Mira's time of death as Friday morning, based on blood clotting, temperature readings, and body decomposition. But what disturbed the coroner most was that some injuries appeared post-mortem, suggesting Dane had returned to the body, possibly to reposition it or interact with it after death. These details painted a horrifying picture of what had taken place inside the apartment. Meanwhile, the hunt for Dane was officially underway. After combing through hours of surveillance footage, police found what they were looking for: a clip from a nearby gas station showing Dane at 3:11 a.m. Sunday morning, walking calmly with a dark green backpack slung over his shoulder. He wore a hoodie pulled low over his eyes, and his face was partially covered by a surgical mask. He made no effort to disguise his build or gait, as if he believed no one was looking for him yet. Back at the apartment, investigators dug deeper into Dane's background. His online activity revealed troubling patterns. He had recently searched for topics such as how long before a body smells, how to clean up after a stabbing, and mental illness and murder. His search history had been partially deleted, but forensic techs recovered enough to show that the murder wasn't spontaneous. He had thought about it. He had planned for it. An even more disturbing find was a hidden USB flash drive found taped under Mira's desk. Inside were audio recordings, hours of Mira's daily life, secretly captured by a small device installed in her bedroom. The recordings were chilling. They included conversations she had with friends, phone calls with her sister, even moments where she simply hummed music to herself while working. Dane had been spying on her for weeks, maybe months, collecting audio and obsessing over her every move. The deeper investigators looked, the more deranged the picture became. This wasn't just a relationship gone wrong. It was an emotional prison Mira had been trapped in, with no one truly aware of the danger she was in. Every piece of evidence told the same story. Dane Kyrell had been unraveling, and he had taken Mira with him when his paranoia finally collapsed into violence. The public was shaken when news of the crime hit local media. A young woman, brutally murdered in her own home by someone she had trusted, and her killer had lived with her body for days like nothing had happened. A manhunt spread across counties, and detectives feared what Dane might do next if he wasn't found quickly. Dane Kyrell's disappearance sent a shockwave through the community. As news of Mira Talcott's gruesome murder spread, panic settled in. Citizens were warned to remain vigilant, and tips poured in from across the region. Every gas station, convenience store, and public transit hub was scoured for signs of the missing suspect. But Dane had vanished into the early morning hours with a quiet precision that hinted at preparation. He wasn't running in a panic. He had mapped a path out. Detectives tracked his movements through a patchwork of surveillance cameras. After leaving Mira's apartment around 3:11 a.m., Dane was caught on camera walking 6 blocks to a 24-hour bus terminal. There, he bought a ticket under a fake name, Troy Delvin, and boarded a long-haul bus heading out of Relford toward a rural town called Bellshade. The town was small, sparsely populated, and surrounded by thick forests and back roads. Exactly the kind of place where someone could disappear. Police dispatched teams to Bellshade and its surrounding woods. Drones scanned hiking trails, and dogs were brought in to search for scent trails. Eventually, investigators stumbled upon a clue deep in the woods. A campsite, barely visible from the road, concealed behind dense underbrush. There was a small green tent, a smoldering fire pit, and a pile of packaged food wrappers. The scene looked recently abandoned, still warm. Dane had been there, and he had been close. Just 20 minutes later, a team sweeping a nearby ravine spotted movement. Crouched low behind a fallen tree, wrapped in a worn sleeping bag, was Dane Kyrell. He didn't run when spotted. Instead, he simply raised his hands and stared blankly as officers approached. There was no resistance, no fight, only the eerie calm of a man who had finally accepted he could not escape. Back at the station, officers began the process of gathering evidence from Dane's belongings. Inside his backpack were several unsettling items. A journal filled with erratic entries, notes about Mira's daily schedule, and paranoid rants about betrayal and abandonment. One page contained a disturbing line repeated over and over. "She lied, she lied, she lied." Alongside the journal were a second prepaid phone, a burner ID card, and a list of remote locations across the state. He had been preparing to disappear completely. Psychological experts were brought in to analyze Dane's state of mind. Though he appeared lucid during questioning, his writings painted a man deep in psychological distress. His obsession with control, surveillance, and delusions of betrayal had created a warped reality where he saw Mira not as a person, but as a threat to his fragile world. He believed she was going to expose him, humiliate him, or leave him. In his mind, the only way to reclaim control was through violence. Detectives also reviewed the timeline again in detail. For 2 full days after the murder, Dane had remained inside the apartment with Mira's body. They found a timer app on his phone that he had set to alert him every hour. It appeared he had been documenting his actions, logging when he ate, when he moved the body, and when he cleaned certain areas. It was mechanical, clinical, and deeply disturbing. The most harrowing moment came when investigators confronted Dane with the evidence. He said nothing for several minutes, staring at the floor. Then, without emotion, he confirmed everything. He admitted to the murder, the planning, the aftermath, and even the escape. But he never expressed regret. Instead, he told officers he believed Mira forced his hand and that he had to do what he did. As news broke that Dane had been captured, relief washed over the town. But the damage had been done. A young woman's life was taken in an act, so violent and cold that even seasoned detectives found themselves shaken. The courtroom would soon become the stage for the next part of the story. But for now, the town of Relford could sleep, knowing the killer was no longer walking free. The trial of Dane Kyrell began 6 months after his arrest. The courtroom was packed with reporters, community members, and Mira Talcott's grieving family. Every day, cameras lined the courthouse steps, and the nation tuned in to follow a case that had become a symbol of hidden violence and obsession behind closed doors. From the outset, it was clear the prosecution was building their case on meticulous evidence. There was no need to speculate. They had everything they needed. The prosecutor began by laying out the timeline of the murder in chilling detail. The jury was shown images from inside Mira's apartment, the blood-stained blanket, the knife recovered from the sink, the untouched pizza box. Each piece of evidence drew gasps from the courtroom. When the forensic pathologist testified, explaining that Mira was alive during the first few blows and likely unconscious but breathing as the rest followed, there was a sickening silence in the room. The recordings found on the hidden USB drive became a key moment in the trial. One after another, clips were played that proved Dane had been monitoring Mira's most private moments. These weren't just recordings of daily noise. They captured Mira crying on the phone to her sister, discussing her fears about Dane's behavior and contemplating leaving him. In one clip, just 4 days before her death, she said she was afraid of what he might do if she ended the relationship. Her words became a haunting prophecy. Dane sat mostly motionless through the trial, occasionally scribbling notes, but never showing emotion. His defense attorney painted him as a mentally ill man who had snapped under delusions and paranoia, urging the court to consider diminished capacity. A psychiatric evaluation presented to the court acknowledged Dane's deteriorating mental state, his obsessive tendencies and paranoia, but concluded he was fully aware of his actions and understood right from wrong. The prosecution argued that Dane didn't just act on impulse, he planned it. He bought the weapon days before. He deleted messages and search histories. He stayed with the body, attempted to clean up the scene, and tried to vanish under a fake name. These were not the actions of someone in a psychotic break. These were calculated, cold decisions made by someone in full control of his faculties. When it came time for sentencing, Mira's mother took the stand to deliver a victim impact statement. Her voice trembled as she described the loss of her daughter, her best friend, her light. She spoke of the horror of knowing how Mira died, terrified and betrayed by the person she once trusted the most. Many in the courtroom wept. Even jurors appeared visibly shaken. The jury deliberated for just over 4 hours before returning a unanimous verdict. Guilty on all counts: first-degree murder, unlawful surveillance, desecration of a corpse, and obstruction of justice. Dane Kyrell was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. But the story didn't end in the courtroom. Mira's case led to new conversations in Relford and beyond about the warning signs of controlling partners and the dangers of hidden abuse. Her family launched a foundation in her name, focused on helping women escape abusive relationships and offering support for those being surveilled or stalked. In the months that followed, legislation was introduced to criminalize secret surveillance devices in private homes, known as Mira's Law. Her name became more than a headline. It became a symbol of what could happen when cries for help go unnoticed or unspoken. Dane was transferred to a high-security prison in another state, far from Relford, where he now spends each day alone, stripped of control, surrounded by the consequences of his own darkness. Mira's apartment remained empty for almost a year before the building owner converted it into a memorial space, small, quiet, filled with her artwork. A reminder of what was lost and a warning of what silence can sometimes hide behind closed doors.